would say you, but it could be left over from before I had any ear for it. We should check.
It could be like a hen.
Can see the direction of the discussion today.
I think it's the same, not the same character, but the same word as roaming in the Zhuangzi. It's wandering at ease. I think that's
Yeah.
Yo as well.
Okay.
So I've heard it pronounced. It's the same.
John and Allie again.
No, they're all online, but various vendors. Some of them come from China, and some of them from Westerners who source stuff from China, and they all have a slightly different approach and philosophy and all that stuff. So mostly Allie's been exploring the options, and then as we taste, we're sort of figuring out what we like. And
What is this tea?
I didn't write down the name, but it's a gold black tea. So it's probably I'm not sure on the processing, but I think they're dried and then aged for longer. I don't think
they're-
they're
I think they're fermented.
okay.
I think in order for them to become black.
Right, so probably oxidized or bruised to cause the darkening. There are some like Assamic varieties of the Chinese tea, so like Assam tea from India. They taste very different from tea bag. Maybe everybody knows, but all the Chinese teas are the same varietal. The plant is the same.
Same plant.
It could be a 100-year-old shrub or bush, but it's all like when it's picked and how it's treated subsequently that creates variations. So.
In the region.
And yeah,
Soil.
same as with wine. That's that.
Years too then, have to do with the weather.
Yeah.
Yes. Some things.
Could you just say again what you were saying about the other room about talisman, because I couldn't quite hear what you said.
It is a talisman and a text too. That's kind of early, if not kind of original source in a sense of Taoist scripture. And its vision is salvation for all through this text.
Is the text the talisman, or is it the whole concept?
Talisman is a single shape like this. And the text would and it's not one that I'm familiar with directly.
Is that a character on the wall behind you? Or
It's a
kind of
it's a talisman that represents the three purities. So especially those three dots, marks. And the lower part of it appears to be the Schwen character. They generally have some identifiable reference. That might be cave up there in the upper right. But I don't know the specific details of the parts. Master Wu did it for this altar.
Just while we're on scripture, I noticed on the yin column, the line's the same as in the golden light
Yeah.
incantation, which is part of the morning liturgy, that Wan Shin Chao Li. And I was just curious what how it, if you knew how it was in both, kind of how, if this was almost from that
Yeah. So
text.
all of these are from. You'll encounter these exact four characters in scripture and alchemical poems.
Here in sort of citations.
Yep. Or I've encountered that with enough of them that that's my clear impression.
Huh.
You're saying that each of the names of the parts of the form.
Yeah. And I don't have original citations on them. The kind of directions of influence are so layered and crossing over among scripture and among different Taoist sources, or sometimes Buddhist sources. That who said it first is, I mean, you can find the oldest text, but they were probably quoting someone. And there isn't a kind of relationship to authorship. It's just, it just exists. And so there's no urge to cite when you quote. It's just a restatement of true understanding. Yeah. So the Lao Tzu is that also, even though it's as if it's a person speaking the Tao Te Ching. It's exact pieces can be found in earlier texts that are not a coherent presentation like that.
Lao Tzu is a person, right?
But Lao Tzu is a person, yep. Who's mythological and deified in all these ways, but is a historical person as well, who becomes that in our narrative.
When you speak about a dipper, I think of a Big Dipper in the
Yeah.
sky, but I'm just wondering if that's part of the reference.
It is, it's the kind of anchor of the reference. It is, the dipper turns, I can't quite do it in my mind so that you see it correctly, but it turns around the pole star. And the dipper, it's as if the dipper is carrying the energy of the transformation around the clock.
As it moves around
As it moves around.
through the seasons.
Yeah. And so, because of that phenomenon, or perhaps it is that way because of these more fundamental understandings, but it's seen as on the one hand, it's what causes transformation. So it's what causes change. And in that role, it's essentially the cause of time and space. Because it moves, and so there's time, and there's, well, you sort of end up circular a little bit, as it were. Yeah. So it's fundamental. So it's seen as center and related to the heart within the body, and center of the universe symbolically.
So is there a sense of that center in the heart and the universe of that same rotation going through a moment or an hour or a day?
Absolutely, yeah. So that cycling that you pointed to in the last discussion of inhale and exhale has a not just an expansion and contraction, but a movement in this way, and those are both occurring in the body, centered around the heart, and so up the back and down the front is something. And not the only cycle, but one of the dominant cycles. And there's also an expansion and contraction that is centered here. There's also others that are centered, but yeah, it is the center in the same way as the dipper is of the universe. And so as I finished the practice with the idea that just lost the tether there. Well, the understanding, the practice and the movement in the body are like the words, or as the words are to our conceptual understanding. And so we're saying to each other now that the dipper and these cycles of transformation are the same. One is the universe and one is in the body. But the feeling of that is understood, of course, in a different way. When we feel that cycle, and then when we feel that cycle as the same as the larger cycle of expansion and contraction of the universe, or cycles of seasons of the year. So bridging that sort of kind of the moment where we kind of see that, come to understand that the time and space cycling around the pole star via the mechanism of the dipper, which is also the what is meant by the chariot of the mystery being the Tao, and the dipper being the chariot. The transformations of yin and yang. That being not just analogous, but in fact the same as the cycling in this center. Becomes available to us through repeat iterations of a form like this. Or sometimes cognitive leap, but
This might be a bit of a cognitive leap, but that thought was coming to me that so many people who don't, many people can identify it, which is also Ursa Major, there.
yeah.
And then, this is going to sound really kindergarten, but there's something about, I'm always interested in how resonant symbols are and how they spread through different
Yeah.
cultures in sometimes very dense places.
Yeah.
So there's the teddy bear. Why should it be teddy bear? There's something about that that symbolizes this home that's kind of a still center, for children.
Yeah.
And people will sometimes cling on to that symbol who don't seem to have other connections.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's nice connection. Makes sense to me. And also I don't know the source of the Ursa appellation, but the dipper being in the north winter, and the bear being somewhat defined in its being and in our minds with the deep hibernation
Right,
through the winter
and the inner focus.
and inner, yeah. There's some alignment there as well, I think.
Thank you.
Felt like a rather still practice in the room. I'm curious about your experiences, if you'd care to share, but also if the guiding language feels like it has a place to go, like you have a place to receive it, and it helps and makes sense and supports that stillness.
I found the guiding language to be wonderful, and the way it flows through you. Very supportive, helpful in the poetry of it.
Great.
Saying especially today, the resonance of the room, the day itself, and your
Yeah.
words, that just all felt resonant.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
that was my experience.
I think my mind, my inner self was like migrating birds. It was a lot that kept going through. Right?
Yep.
Powerful
It's a
movement.
There was a
beautiful-
lot of migration going on.
How many
I
birds?
relate to that in some way, I think.
It's true.
Which direction?
Oh, the three birds on
Yeah.
I felt very still, at peace, but at the same time, I was noticing thoughts arising and sort of like recognizing that I had a thought, and and sort of like evaluating it, like playing with it a little bit, and then coming back to your words.
Yeah.
So I was kind of going between this place of like being really like still and quiet while in this observation mode, and coming back and hearing the words coming through you and really appreciating everything I was hearing. And also I had this desire to take your words with me to a later date, like tonight or tomorrow. Like I was just thinking it'd be so great to have what you're saying when I'm doing my own practice. Because, well, yeah, and then I thought about it afterwards. But I just, it is so interesting just every day, all that we show up with as a different combination of things that influence us. And it can kind of shape our availability to information, or shape our perspective, or certain things are highlighted or dismissed. You know, it's
Yeah.
just interesting.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what practice is about coming back to the same thing in all the different forms that we find ourselves in, and integrating it deeper and in a unique way each time, I guess.
Yeah, I think, thank you for sharing. I think that feeling of being still but aware, saying observing almost, I mean, I say it too, but it almost puts too much subjectivity to the awareness instead of just being aware. It is a being that is observing. And so that's occurring to me now, like we might want to that's a sort of built-in language problem that I don't escape by talking about being the clear and still, the clarity and stillness, instead of being the self. But on the other hand, noting that in our language can help us loosen that feeling and not reestablish a subjectivity somewhere else, but rather just let it all fall away until you're just aware.
Like existence and non-existence, but language and non-language.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. One of the beautiful strengths of the Taoist language is it's always playing with that. It's always playing with language. You know, here we are presenting it as language, and everything is language. That's language. This is language. This is a meaning vessel. You know, and it is either named or nameless. And when it's named, it's of the multitude, and when it's nameless, it's of the unity. And so if we carry that awareness with that understanding with our articulations, our practice, our choices, and we have the opportunity to be still while observing.
Complete the circle. To stay serious goes against my nature.
Don't do it for an
No,
instant.
Every once in a while. No, I don't always hear what you're saying. Sometimes because I'm somewhere else, and sometimes because I just can't hear it.
Mhm.
But, but I've kind of gotten to the point where it just feels like that's okay. to restate a lot of things, in each practice. So that I feel like, it's eventually different things are gonna, reach my consciousness, and when they do, then that's great.
Yeah.
But it's very soothing, and so it kind of fits in with the meditation, and so it's not intrusive. And I know, having gone to some yoga classes, which are not really something I like doing that much, but I've interacted with you. Some people really feel intrusive when they lead a meditation, and they talk too much, and they're sort of like putting their stuff
Right.
into it, and I don't really feel comfortable with that. I always feel, if I'm hearing it, it feels like interesting and supportive. So
Okay. Yeah, I was kind of more specifically asking about the kind of specificity of the language around being clear and still without doing, which you have also answered. Have you heard the part about listening without hearing? Then you're right on track.
Yeah.
Bring it.
Well, and I feel like on some level you're listening even if you're not hearing.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. No, it's fine, for sure. Yeah.
the Mark's Brothers routine says, did you say something? And the other one says, no. First one says, well, because I didn't hear anything, and the other one says, that's because I didn't say anything. Great moment in cinema.
It's a good thing to say when you're stumped in a moment of awkward silence.
Did you say something?
I'm looking at this, there's a diagram that's sort of showing you like a binary derivation of the hexagrams, and we've been talking about that a few times, but it was what you were saying about moving between this, not deeper observation, but there are these thoughts that are very particular, or words that are coming up, and then there's a sort of settling into recognizing that they're kind of coming from somewhere. And it made me think of this arrangement. But from the bottom, then it would be unity, one and the other, yin and yang, and then you're just splitting each time and moving up. So this is the hexagrams. But the ordering of the text that comes out of that, so if yin is a 0 and yang is a 1, it gives you a sort of ordering of 64, but it's not the order that was used in the text.
Sure.
It is the order that has been used historically, and that the author is associating effectively that there was a knowledge of binary mathematics for the people who are working with this stuff. But you end up here, which is just one thing and then the other thing and then one thing and then the other thing and then one thing and then the other thing. But at root, you just have yin and yang. So like at some level, there's just being and non-being, or there's just yes and no, or there's just light or dark or whatever. But all this intermixed stuff is all those thoughts. Like, that's my experience of it. That it's like rapid alternation. It's
Sure.
surface movement, which is just all that multiplicity. Is this? It really is one thing and another thing. But at root, then there's this much more discernible and recognizable qualities that are these bigger concepts in philosophy, non-being, or form and emptiness.
Right.
And it's very useful for that, to have that kind of image, I find. But, and it occurred to me as well that I had a friend who practices acupuncture, and just one piece of advice from reading my pulses that she gave was like, you should always eat breakfast and eat a wet breakfast. So the general prescription wasn't like to have this or that food or something like that. It was just nourishing yin.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can kind of see that like a specific, like don't eat this thing or have more of this, or something would be much more at this superficial level. But
Right.
as a health prescription, nourish yin might mean getting more sleep, or it might mean not doing as intense physical activity, or depending where you're looking. But it was a very, very powerful, insightful thing to just focus on that one simplified thing that you could integrate every morning when you wake up, within the rhythm of these cycles we're looking at. But it's somehow having that arrangement, like nourish yin is just this big discernible block, whereas if the thing I was trying to learn was like one of these among all these other ones, it would be much harder to like sustain over time, which is what you were saying about practice as well. Constantly coming back to it and establishing that center, that consistency. Few associations. I've been thinking of sharing that this week, but I'm sure you've shared it before. But it's,
I haven't. I usually use the circular. But that's helpful for sure. Augustin and I have been studying the Earth, and the visualization. I think it's helpful. Also, the visualization of the core of the Earth being smooth and spherical and elemental, and the surface of the Earth, and with all of its. This is true of the gradations in between too. Gradually more movement and hardnesses and weaknesses, but in any case, the result is mountains and rivers and oceans and the circulating weather, but this constancy of the core within. It has the same structure as that, and
Feast of the Folded.
yeah, but also has the same structure as your observation, Diana, on your experience in the meditation of that, from the center, noticing the variation, the thoughts come and go. So it all has that pattern and the opportunity to either simplify it in a yin versus yang. I'm going to orient in this way in order to balance, whether it's your breakfast or the way that you walk, is helpful in kind of tethering to that underlying constancy, sameness. And also where practice, on a given day or a given moment of practice might be these little iterations. The constancy of intention and orientation and sincerity and kind of being tethered toward spirit and realization constantly is that solid center, and the practice may be like this or that, but that intention, which is also associated with earth and center, is the constancy. You know? And in a way, it's not a quality that the constancy has or that we have that is constant. It is identical with constancy. Sincerity is how constancy is expressed through us in this even more fundamental way. I would find it interesting, enjoyable, and supportive to be, our practice time, our meditation. We slow time in a way, and witness ourselves going through the practice, and we learn things about practice and self and experience and phenomena and body and mind. And it's always good to remind ourselves that whatever that pattern is we just identified is also true of all of the larger nested patterns, whether that's our day, our year, our life. And so to allow yourself to extrapolate in really both directions is kind of how we let the practice guide us and open us up. Like the experience of chi for the first time can really confuse your sense of reality if you let it, or it can just be something a strange thing that happened while I was meditating, But if you feel or see or experience a range of reality from material to less material to immaterial, and extrapolate from that experience to its fullest consequences, because it is a thing that you know, and if you let it, it has the opportunity to shatter and reshape your perspective of all of your experiences. Which is part of what we do by walking these conceptual circles, cycles. Is to kind of draw in, reconsider, and become comfortable with the changes and the consequences of our internal experience demand of us in a way.
That's exactly sounds like you're giving words to the shape that my relation to the alchemical text has taken, which is very much that the opening yourself to the material and allowing this kind of curiosity and exploration that is akin to walking down a path in the woods that you haven't been down before. It has that simplicity to it. It doesn't have to be rational pinning, conceptual kind of. It's allowing yourself to encounter new material, and as that sinks in, if you can sincerely let it sink in, then it is just transformative through the encounter and through the sort of suffusion of that with the way you're looking at things, or the way things come up and sink down again. It isn't a method that you apply as far as we've talked about that a little bit.
Yeah.
It's not something that it's not like a recipe so much as a kind of fragrance or something like that. It's there and it's, yeah.
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 Good.
It's taken time to,
Yeah.
for that to take shape, because I think it's not something that's, the position you're in is unprecedented as an American Taoist or an American born individual who is in a lineage in the way that you are. So I think this teaching is unfolding here at this moment in this way.
In this way.
And that's distinct. So,
Something that's coming up, I don't really know what this was leading towards, but just when you brought that out, going to the, like thinking of the binary, like 1, 2, 1, 2, I don't know what you want to call it that. Or I mean 0, 1, 0, 1.
Yeah.
But the aspect of, well, studies of the mind say, or of, not, the study of the brain and its ability, or, okay, language. So, well, okay, the ability to focus on more than one thing at a time has been shown that one can only focus on one thing at a time, that like multitasking is actually just focusing, focusing.
Switching.
And just switching, yeah. And that's what, like what looks like a piano,
Right,
piano
yeah.
keys or something, made me think of. But then coming back to the yin yang, or well, the symbol of it, is this aspect to me of almost like this overarching, like all of that existing in the same something or other in the same universe, but it's sort of like, well, I feel like this is separate, but it's tying into when I'm forgetting of something and I'm like really trying to grasp it, I can't get it, so I have to completely let go of the desire. And
To recover
but
that.
yeah, but there's it's not, you can't just let go of the desire. What I have to do is actually enter into trust that it'll rise up when I do let it go. And that trust is what allows me to let go, to then allow it to rise up in the unexpected moment. And then boom, there it is. And I'm like, oh great, here's the information I wanted to tell you. I knew how to get it once I let go of trying to want to get it, you know? And it's like this ubiquitous, synonymous, like all things existing in the same moment in time, as opposed to the way we separate and segregate our attention. But it's actually that our attention is there. And I don't know, there could be instances where I'm just like surprised that I'm, you know, I don't know, maybe like I get somewhere and I'm like, I drove somewhere and I'm thinking, how did I get here? Literally, I think I was like, how did I stay on the road? I was totally like in another mind state, but I somehow like maintained doing all the things. So, yeah.
That's multitasking. Not what we think of as multitasking.
Yeah.
Probably were.
Well, I think the intention there is stay on the road and get there safely is like deeply rooted. And then all the other things that are happening within me are sort of a lesser intention, maybe something. That's how I kind of look at it.
I have the same process when I'm trying to remember Stevie Nicks' name. Fleetwood Mac. And so now there's certain things that I always forget. And so, you know, I think it's partly an age thing, but you realize after a while that the harder you try to remember something, the less likely you are to remember it when you let go. And so sometimes I'll check in with myself by trying to see if I can recall Stevie Nicks' name, for example. That's one that I always forget. And day when I can come right up with Stevie Nicks, right off the bat, I'm having a good day.
It's a good meter.
But it is funny how, you just leave it alone and it'll be there.
Huh. I wonder what is technically his name.
Stevie Nicks?
Yeah, you might be.
That's a she. She was,
Oh, I'm sorry.
She was this wonderful rock singer from the 70s, still performing. Was part of Fleetwood Mac, the band.
I'm gonna remember that.
But I'm kind of taken with how computer sciencey the organizational framework is, because of the binary connection and also a lot of data structures in computer science are, you look at them from the bottom up in the way that we do, which if you think of a tree, when they're called trees, in computer, data structures are always upside down from the trees you see outside. So it's very familiar. But then it got me thinking about how Earth-centric and maybe things in our galaxy, the teachings are centered around that view of the cosmos. Trying to use the right words, but so I'm curious about that because we're only one small part of everything, and then I associate the idea of Tao with the idea of whatever everything is.
Mhm.
But it seems as possible that there could be worlds that aren't binary, and that's just kind of seems like it could be arbitrary and just is how our world is organized. And so that just gets me off into some tangents. But then I think, well, that doesn't really matter because this is the world that we're living in. So this way of looking at things works for us, the level that we're on.
Yeah, from my perspective, it's more fundamental than that. It wouldn't have variation. It, because it's an insight into existence, not into the solar system. It's an insight into the relationship between being and non-being, and the polarity is not one of the possibilities, it's the possibility. And so we articulate it. It is articulated through us and through our experience of the world. And it necessarily plays out in this binaries transforming into each other. I'm not pointing at it clearly. It's I think it isn't that we are this and we are seeing this and we have organized this. It's that both these things have come into being out of the unity that is also the multitude. And the bridge between the unity and the multitude is this branching, which has a particular pattern that we can see, and our seeing of it is of the pattern. But it's not that we've looked out and we've seen these things and they fit this pattern. It's that we've looked in, and in the absence of pattern, we see how pattern comes to be.
I think in that, like the non-duality language, like the you mean whichever way
Mm-hmm.
round, if it isn't just a sort of a psychology of you know, how to practice non-dualism for the sake of it, it's almost like it's useful in that sense to refer to the knowing, looking inside and recognizing the truth of your identity with. It's the same, that knowing is the universe in that kind of way that
Right.
the mystical traditions refer to, that like a glass in the ocean, there's no, it's not an empty container anymore, there's no distinction between what's in that and what's outside that. It
Mhm.
becomes, the vessel is completely in the medium in that way. And
Mm-hmm.
that framing of that I haven't encountered in other texts I've read or things I've heard, but it seems like it could be a useful, you know, the sense that the sense of separate self, and it is fundamentally a dualism that we carry around with us,
Mm-hmm.
that we view the world from that perspective, and that, yeah, knowledge system could reflect that as well.
Mm-hmm.
You have a little system and you pull it out and you look at things, but
Yeah.
it seems like the only way of verifying that for yourself is to undergo the movement towards realization, and then you'll know it, but you won't be able to talk about it, you won't be able to name it.
Mm.
You'll be able to refer to it, but you can't name the quality of that experience because it's of the nature of open awareness or silence or stillness. But that is also the nature of the physical universe as well.
Mhm.
The movement is coming forth from space, matter and space kind of movements.
Mhm. Yep. Good.
Where does the naming of yin and yang fit? Because I'm not sure what I'm asking. And that you've pointed out bunches of times that that yin and yang don't exist as pure yin and yang. They each contain the other within them.
Mhm.
So in some sense that picture is more orderly than
Unless you squish it into one, right?
These are inseparable.
once you get to the bottom, it's
When you move up a layer, you haven't gone anywhere. You know what I mean? So all of those layers are
just a check.
just one. They're inside each other.
Yeah.
Is that a visual of the Russian dolls?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's really helpful, the nested models, where it's a repetition of itself wherever you look at it, and at whatever minuteness or vastness you're considering. And also, in addition, inclusive. And so the smallest doll includes the largest doll, which includes the smallest doll. And so, so the naming of yin and yang, yes, it's fundamental, But it is naming, and it puts distance between the unnamed and
Yeah.
what's being considered. And so, but the further back toward the unnamed we get, the more feel or opportunity we have for recognition. And so, clarity and stillness is yang and yin as an inseparable unity. That's the it's light in space, right? Without space, there would be no light. And so we talk about them separately, and together they have this particular action, so that when we study it, we can recognize the fundamental beneath all of the details of the transformations. But really, it's as if it's a static unity simultaneously, that whole, in spite of the appearance of time and space and change.
Which is considered.
It's okay. Again, almost as Diana said earlier, the thoughtlessness within thought is the one way to. So the thoughts may be happening, we may be happening, our lives may be happening, but it's the absence of thought within thought. It's the absence of concept within concept. That is where we rest. And that is, the constant error that we constantly correct is to identify with our thoughts. And if we are the thoughtlessness, the absence of thought within the weather of the thoughts that come and go, then the more time we spend there, the more we have the opportunity for that, the consequences of that experience and understanding to permeate through to the tips of the leaves, and for all the details of our experience to be the play of the miraculous multitude, and our relationship to it is one of wonder. Until there is no relationship to be had.
Well, just when you mentioned space and light, I was curious your impression of which would be yin and yang.
Generally, well, in the sort of clearest tether, it would be the light is the yang and the space is the yin. The light is the presence and the space is the absence. But they're inextricable, and so like the light has space, and the space has light. And the space has existence in a way. And the light has absence in a way. So, you can, so that's the most fundamental, that the light is, when we talk about, or when I talk about the bright space, the brightness is the clarity in the yang, and the space is the stillness in the yin. But it's useful to let it be confusing, because there are ways in which they are each fundamental to each other.
And I saw a comment that was like, I thought of this last week as well, but just how our retina in our eyes flip what we see upside down, but then flip it again, so then we see it gray. And I don't know what the function is of that, but I just think it's interesting when we talk about trees, because actually what's happening subconsciously, or I don't know if you call it subconsciously, but what's happening inside the mechanism of our body is that we actually see the tree upside down first before we recognize it as upright.
Yep.
If you all have any hypotheses of why the body does that, why the eyes do that, I'd be curious to know.
I have read an explanation, but I don't remember it. Which reminds me, I was going to say earlier about the relationship between remembering and creativity, because that recall it, remembering and generating have this kind of equivalence that is interesting. That way of the technique that you described that is familiar to each of us, I think, of stopping, trying to remember, which is this letting go. It's also essential to any successful creative moment, is the opening and allowing to come through. But that's the same mechanism as remembering, which is a nice everything has already happened kind of moment. But in the sort of in the day-to-day, in the detailed iterations, August does these elaborate Hot Wheels races. And he's got over 100 cars, and they all have names. And my role in the race is the announcer. And so, naming these cars like I'm calling a race or an auction or something. And
does he cue you up, or you've got to have it?
I've got to have it. Just, he'll give it a while, or if I get it wrong, So, it's all in good fun, but there's a lot of cars, and so it's been a good kind of experience and little exercise in just that. It's like, if I just start the sentence like, and here comes blah blah blah, a lot of the time it comes.
I found that too. I was with something similar. I was with my nephews a couple weeks ago, and the older 4-year-old was like, I was putting him to bed, and we read some stories, but then he was like, "Oh, tell me a story," and I thought, okay, and then I was thinking, hey, what do I want to tell a story about? And I was like, okay, just start. I don't know what I want to tell a story about. Okay, and then I had an idea, but I had no idea where it was going to go next, and no idea where it was going to go next. But I allowed myself to just follow the one step after the next, and it turned into a story that had a beautiful, like it was just beautiful. And then I told another one after that, and another one after that, and each one had a beginning, a whole momentum to it, that not even a lesson per se, but just a whole experience that came with it, and then a closure, and it was magical, and I just thought, whoa, I was pretty good at that. I didn't think, I had no idea where I was going to go, but it was about the not being attached to it not being attached to having to understand where I was going with it, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I enjoy like beatboxing and freestyling, though I don't do the freestyling too much, but I want to do that more always. But it's the same thing. It's a total vulnerable experience of having no idea what's going to come out, and hoping that like not some crazy profanity or like some weird part of my human self will show up and embarrass me. But yeah, anyway.
Open improvising, that kind of,
Yeah.
Yeah, I had that same experience learning to do that with August, and he had a 2 or 3 year phase of tell me a story. And once you make the realization that you just did, then it's this enjoyable kind of romp through and then there's I think Phil and I have traded stories about this, so I think it's not uncommon, but there's a few patterns, and then there are these long narrative arcs with many iterations and characters, and all from that beginning of, well, here we go. No idea what this is about, but there's Maury and there's Otto, and they surf, and
My stories always had food in them.
Oh.
And that was important. You have a picnic in the woods somewhere with warm bread and hunks of roasted chicken and bottles of wine and cheeses. And, that was just every story had
Historical setting.
yeah, kind of go-to moment.
Yeah.
My daughter was very food-oriented in that.
Yeah, August's stories are sort of racing oriented, or dragons or dogs or whatever he's into at the moment.
Interesting time yesterday.
Well, just on the memory to the creativity connection, it kind of folds in on itself, right? Because then you have to tell those stories again that you, by request, that you, made up on the spot and can't even recall the character names. But then, as you begin, it or something almost like it comes back into being.
Mm-hmm.
We used to do a fun thing with a family road trips, where somebody would start a story and then you just keep passing it around, so everybody's sort of stream of consciousness merged into this story. It's a hilarious story. So. I was just thinking about yesterday. Playing Harold and having this moment where I thought, why in the world did I say anything about the fact that I was doing that? Because Heather and Aaron were both very top of the chart artists, and they're going to be there, and I'm going to be trying to play, and I'm going to be thinking about them, and so I was having a tough moment before I left the gig, but then once I started, I just sort of forgot about it.
Yeah.
And things flowed.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's an interesting balance of caring and not caring. I
Yeah, and and you know, both of them would be supportive and not caring. So it was all my stuff,
Right.
but still, it was tough.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the lessons of creativity and doesn't always feel like improvisational, but there's always a creativity is fundamentally improvisational in some way. Are a good way to open up these teachings because they're directly in alignment with. I came into, I was saying to Diana last week, came into this world of Tao and all of its particularities from poetry and painting, and that intimacy with the creative process led me to feel a feeling of familiarity and recognition from the outset. And I think these particular experiences that we're talking about had that opportunity of, well, coming into being is coming into being. It's the same as this thing that just came out of my mouth that I didn't plan, or out of my hand or body or whatever. And that's a nested pattern of the pattern as large as you can draw it, of coming into being. Stillness and openness. Something arises, happens, it's gone. That's the whole thing that we're articulating here.
Forgetting is so fundamental in so many of the texts as well, philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
the practice. I've been finding, initially it was almost a sense of that, like, why me moment, but it's almost as though unnecessary aspects of being through me are forgetting themselves. And it's kind of in those movies where, things start disappearing, there's this. But it's actually profoundly liberating. It's beginning to become comfortable with that happening. Feels like it's part of the lineage transmission. It's another experience than I have had prior to sort of accepting that connection.
Mm-hmm.
But it almost verifies something that's sort of there in the philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
To sit and forget, or in relation to sitting in oblivion is another name for that, but allowing things to return and to settle.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing in relation to sort of poetry and creativity and philosophy is to sit like this and to really listen and to bring things forth. And I think it opens up a possibility of recognizing language as symbolic, and that's something I can't often carry myself, is that a symbolic system allows you to discern repetition. If you're in the midst of a conversation, you don't often get that, but over time, to see a recurrence, however frequent that is something that you do with symbols. And there's something about the kind of meaningfulness of everyday language that it doesn't, I can't usually work at that level of recognizing over time the things that I'm saying to myself again and again, or the things that are saying themselves through me, or through the situations I end up in, or cycles, or patterns, effectively. But what's so interesting about this is that it's image-based, and they are pure symbols. They are just symbols. You know, they may have Chinese words associated with them, but I think it's illustrative and it's very. You can get that without talking about it. And I think when you say that this sort of very fruitful part of this tradition is this demonstration, or this use of form that allows you to understand things intuitively through these symbols. Yeah, I think that's something it's clarifying to talk in a sensitive way, because that's effectively what you're doing. You're opening up some space around the things you say all the time, or how you talk about something, or whatever it is. And, yeah, I find that very, very nourishing. But
Yep.
I'm not sure I'm making a specific point.
Well, no, I think it's an important point. I think that it's a step in the process of not seeing ourselves as separate from the pattern, and so like the way that we relate to our dreams as a sometimes as a collection of meaningful symbols that we can read in some way is a way that we can also relate to this waking dream in which things repeat and the absurd and the commonplace are intimate and but mostly perhaps helpful in the ways that John's talking about in observing ourselves as this symbolic organization that is the play of these transformations.
I think it must be why psychoanalysis works, is that you lie down, you just start talking, and then you do it for a month, you do it for a year, and then you realize, I've said that like 10 times. And like it's sort of like it sifts out when you go in initially, you must be like carrying this meaningful.
Right.
But if you say things over time, then you begin to lay bare the pattern in a way. So
Right.
you can see why it might end you up in a similar, ultimately towards a kind of liberation, freeing yourself from whatever the bonds are.
True.
That was just getting from what you were saying that that having a graphic symbol that is not directly connected to language is another way to access things without having to name them. And that's helpful. And another thing that I'm finding interesting is that I'm learning about sort of exploring dreams, that Jung was very interested in alchemy and studied Eastern philosophies a great deal, I think. There are also another, although maybe dreams are connected with our ability to use language, but they still seem like another avenue without at least consciously directing images and words that go get at something that's more fundamental.
I think we might connect. One of your first questions was to do with whether the philosophy, the one and then the two, and then it's cosmological. I think it was in the first session. And one thing in alignment with this orientation I've been speaking about is to almost look at this more as like a logic, a system that just says, well, we can have, maybe there's some 0, and then maybe there's a 1, and there's a 2, and then there's a 4, and then there's an 8. And it's a way of just talking about division and basically the one and the many, or unity and multiplicity. But I feel as though the cosmological part of it, I try and read separately in a way, almost as both mythic and something that you will understand intuitively, but in the in-between, to take it almost as in its logical aspect is almost, you're recognizing it's just a symbol system in a way. And it seems to loosen something up to allow me to play with it or to engage with it without having to sort of, okay, so this is like mapping it onto the Big Bang or something might be valid, it might be accurate, but
Sure.
To just see it as a system of distinctions, like the 12-tone scale or something like that, you know, or like a clapping pattern. You have like a sound and then a space, and those are things that you do well when you do them simply and intuitively and playfully. So I don't know if that's something I found it as that. And then you start seeing them here. And
Sure.
any way that you've associated with that is also there in those sort of in that alignment with that. Yeah.
There's no limit to how far you explode that, is there?
No.
I mean, I've kind of gotten to the point where I was thinking, oh, well, there are 64 patterns because of the I Ching. But that's kind of like as much as would fit on a piece of paper, maybe. I don't know.
Or as much as is useful, you know.
Yeah.
But I mean, people have taken it to the, I mean, what is it, 3,600 something,
Right.
64 times 64, two hexagrams together. It's just more detail about the subsection that the hexagram is articulating. So yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that something you were saying earlier about forgetting. I was just thinking of the beauty of that, especially when we're totally cool with it, is like this like playful innocence that allows us to experience life with nuance and awe and refreshment, but then like a more rigid self could, where the ego is involved, could be disappointed in oneself for forgetting.
Yeah.
But then often those instances, there's a lesson learned, or there's like texture drawn out of that sort of shaming of self, which is weird, but then, hopefully coming back to a softening, and then that which is being held also falls and shows its many faces, and
Yeah, absolutely.
so it's interesting
Yeah.
experience.
I'm hearing a kind of tuning a string, like the ego coming in and being like, why do you forget everything? Like your memory's terrible. Like they're tightening this. But yeah, I mean, at some point it's going to be so tense that you'll have to have a mini crisis about like, where is this separation occurring? That one part of you is trying to be easygoing, the other part's coming in and wagging the finger. But it's so much part of the practice too, even just in sitting with your spine and your body in the right way, is just getting that tension and release of tension and relaxation kind of correctly balanced, calibrated.
I mean, in a way, and I'm sort of building on a vague memory of what a French thinker, Marc Auger, has articulated about oblivion. But given that our experience is cumulative and massive in its detail, actually the mechanism for coherence is forgetting. And and it was one reason that I think of it often, actually, but one reason bringing it up now is because his language fits in with your language just now, and the image that he brings to it is the ocean being forgetting and oblivion, eroding the landscape, but the landscape is formed by that forgetting, but now it has this form that we name. But it's because we forget that we can make a smooth line. 'Cause otherwise, we can't. There's no place to put just an aggregate of infinite granules of experience. But we should wrap.
Mark Auger.
Auge, A-U-G-E. Mark with a C. He also, I haven't read him for over a decade, but he also writes a lot about non-space.
He's an anthropologist. He writes in
Yeah, sort of, yeah.
Mm.